Hi there, I'm Dr. Emma DeMarco, and this is the Unmusical Podcast. Today's episode is with saxophonist, contemporary performer, and improviser, Dr. Joshua Hyde. So welcome, Josh. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So nice to be talking to you all the way Brisbane to Paris.
Brisbane to Paris, direct.
Yes, so perfect. It's really interesting. I haven't seen you a little while, and the last time I saw you, you had a bit more of an Australian accent than you do right now.
Yeah.
Is that
it tends to fade away.
Yeah, just absorb. Are you mostly speaking French, or are you speaking a few European languages?
Yeah, just whatever's necessary, I guess. But I think it kind of fades away because when you do speak English, you just have people going, "What? What?" And so it tends to just, you kind of have to repeat it in this kind of European international English, which is which is a foreign language, but you kind of get stuck in it, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, but I do most of my work in French or German, I guess.
Oh, wow. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your career and what you're up to in Paris?
What am I up to in Paris? Well, I grew up in Australia and I came over to France to study a long time ago. And kind of 1 year of study became many years of study, and years of study also kind of led to having different projects here in Paris and in Europe and wherever else. And so I've just kind of been here ever since. It's been 15 years now, I think.
Oh, wow, that long.
Yeah, it's been a while. We're getting old, Emma.
I know, right?
And so currently I play with a bunch of different groups. There's a group that I play with that I founded here called Sound Initiative, which is more like experimental music, so contemporary music, but also mixing like movement and theater and electronics and kind of spatialized work with new music. It's about 10 of us. I also play with a group in Cologne called Musikfabrik, and it's kind of a pretty traditional kind of new music ensemble. I have a duo with a percussionist who actually lives now in Montreal. We met in Paris, but we started playing together when he was living in Paris. It's called Scapegoat. And I also play with Elision, which is based in Australia. So that's sometimes we play in Europe and sometimes it'll be back in Australia.
Wow.
And then I teach. I also teach at the Geneva Music University, La Haute École de Musique de Genève, which doesn't actually have a name in English. So it's really weird to talk about the institution in English. It doesn't exist. They even have a document about their institute because it's part of a Swiss. It's called the university has a name in English. It's called the University of Applied Sciences of Western Switzerland. So that has a name in English. But there's a document that has a name for each different kind of. We have six different schools. There's a school of like health, science, whatever it is, and there's a music school. But the music school doesn't have a name in English. All the other ones have a translation, but we don't get a name. So I'm never sure what to call it.
Yeah, that's really confusing. Do you think it ever will get a name?
I don't know. I asked our director the other day and I was like, what is our school called? And she's like, I don't know. And she's like, does anyone know? We're like, no, nobody knows.
Don't need to know. So it's got a name.
They kind of went through some reforms. I think, when was it? Maybe 10 years ago. And it changed name in French as well, but they never got around to
getting the English name.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So yeah, I work at this kind of ghost French institution.
I like that as a description. That's excellent. Well, one thing I know and I've learned, especially doing this podcast, is that no 2 days tend to look the same for performers. So I mean, I could ask you what a typical day looks like, but maybe you could tell us what a typical couple of days might look like for you.
Yeah, I mean, no 1 day is the same. My teaching days seem to be similar. So a week, I guess, for me would be, a week starts on Tuesday. I get up at 5. I take the train to Geneva. I teach all Tuesday, Wednesday. Then I come back to Paris Wednesday night. And then either I'll have projects here or I'll go somewhere else and for rehearsals or recording or whatever it is. Last week I was in Baden-Baden for a recording with Musikfabrik. Before that, I can't actually remember. I have to look at my calendar. But I was this weekend we had a gig in Paris with one of my bands. So I mean, every week is just kind of different. I like the stability of teaching because it kind of there's financial stability and kind of somehow a mental stability. So I have 2 days a week of teaching, which is great. I see my students, and then when I get on a train and come back to Paris, I forget all their names, and I just go into kind of artist mode and practice here in my studio, record, and just do whatever projects come up, I guess.
One thing that I know my students would be keen to ask you if they were here is how much do you practice? Professional musician.
How much do I practice?
How much? Is it 6 hours a day?
That's a tricky question. Because when I was a student, I would practice 6 hours a day every day. I did that for more than 10 years.
Yeah.
And you have to do it when you're a student because you're kind of building up this kind of base of technique, base of understanding, base of knowing yourself as well, knowing how to get to a place. You know, you see a score or you have a project and you know where it needs to be. That's half of the battle, is knowing what it needs to sound like. So that's training your ear, listening, going to concerts, all that kind of stuff. And then the other half of the battle is knowing how to get there with your instrumental technique or with your sound, with whatever it is. And so putting that kind of foundation down when you're a student is really the most important thing. So that later on, when you are a professional, you can, for me, sometimes it's like one week it's this project, like this past 4 weeks we had this recording project in Germany, and then the end of that week I had a gig with my band, this totally different improvised stuff, working with pedals and whatever else. And then this week I had rehearsals with my pianists on some sonatas, and then today we have rehearsals for a saxophone quartet. So like you can't really realistically be practicing 6 hours a day when you have so much stuff going on. So those foundations need to be there. So I like practicing. I'm someone that always and I think that the students that know how to practice and like practicing can go far.
Yes.
So I guess in response to your question, no, I don't practice 6 hours a day, but if I did have the time, I would.
Yes, I feel the same way. I find my students are always shocked when I say, some days I might fit in like a half an hour little technique refresher. And they're like, but how? How do you do what you do? And it's like, well, yeah, when I was back in uni, there was many years where I was doing that.
You got to put in the time, yeah. But it can be, just preparing for a project and practicing. Like there's some, like with Elysian in Australia, we do ridiculous contemporary music that's very difficult, these ridiculous scores. And so sometimes you have to practice for 6 months before the gig. You have to start 6 months out really, every day. Just working at it. And then there's some other gigs you don't have to practice so much for, but that's all about knowing yourself and knowing what the time you need to put in for a score, I guess.
Yeah. Well, look, let's dive into your instrument. I can see them in the background there. You're a saxophonist, as am I.
Yes.
And we will dive into that whole wall behind you as well. I'm so excited to ask you more about the instruments there. How would you describe yourself? Are you a classical saxophonist, a contemporary saxophonist, a new music performer? What genre do you put yourself in, or do you not put yourself in?
I tend not to put myself in a genre. I think I'm a musician, and I feel like sometimes I try to be an artist, but it's a very difficult kind of word to stamp yourself as.
Really? You feel a distinction there?
Between musician and artist?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. Can you unpack that a little? That's fascinating.
Well, I mean, it kind of comes back, I guess, to the way we're trained, isn't it? A musician is someone they learn whatever craft it is. So it's playing classical music. You put the score in front of them. They know how to realize that and come up with the sounds that are required. But they're not part of the creative process at all. They're not part of, deciding which notes to play. There is somehow some kind of room for interpretation, and we talk about that in our training as classical musicians. But at the end of the day, when you take into account the notes you have to play, the rhythms you have to play, the kind of sound that you're required to play, which is, related to the style, the vibrato that's related to the style, the articulation that's related to the style, performance practice, at the end of the day, you really don't have very much room to move as an artist when you're a performing musician.
Okay, that makes sense.
One could even argue that as a jazz musician, if you get called up to do like a wedding gig, or if you're on someone's album that's playing a particular kind of music, there's very little room to move there either. There are a lot of kind of very straight lines in all kinds of music that you have to follow if you want to be in the style. And if you show up to a wedding and start playing some really out like free jazz that you just like came up with like, you're never going to get, you're going to get kicked out of the wedding. You're not going to get any champagne. Like you're going to be going home. So in that sense, I feel like a musician in that role, I don't think you could define them as an artist straight up. I don't think that's how it works.
Okay.
When you become an artist, I think particularly for classical musicians, and this is something I talk to my students about a lot, is it's like, what is the most important creative decision you can make as a performer of classical music? And some students will be like, it's how you interpret the piece, or it's how you do, your sound or the vibrato or whatever it is. At the end of the day, like I said, none of that stuff is really up to you. The only thing the fundamental thing that's up to you as a classical musician is the choice of the music that you play, what pieces you play. And I think that when you start really kind of zooming out and seeing that your identity as a performing musician is really related to the repertoire that you play, the pieces that you play, then you start becoming an artist somehow. But just being able to show up to the gig and do what's required with someone else choosing the piece, I'm not sure. For me, that the line of artistry kind of is not there yet.
Wow. So you're playing a lot of different music. You're working with a lot of different ensembles. I mean, we started at the question of, what genre or not genre, musician versus artistry. Where do you place yourself in the world of saxophone?
Well, it depends what I'm doing. I think that's what's interesting about it, because I do so many things. I play with these groups, but I also compose. I do my own solo stuff. I compose for other people. I compose for myself, and I have groups where I improvise as well. And I feel like an artist, obviously, when I compose. I feel like an artist when I have my own solo stuff. So I have solo shows with like visual elements and kind of improvisational contexts, I call them. But I guess when I get called up to do a gig, for example, with Music Fabrique or whoever it is, and they're like, this is the piece we're playing, you're recording this next week, this is how much you're getting paid. I don't feel like an artist when I do that.
Sure.
There are some times when you're kind of, the composer will push you a little bit to really invest in the piece. And some collaborations, you kind of feel that. I have a collaboration at the moment that will be premiering in September with a Croatian composer called Tomislav Oliver. And we're really, really collaborating and really kind of, there's a real back and forth. So that, in that way, you kind of feel more like an artist. But when you just kind of receive the piece in the mail and you're kind of just doing it, I don't know, there's a really kind of gray area. There's a line there.
Wow.
To be found. So yeah, I feel like an artist sometimes. I feel like a saxophone player sometimes. I grew up playing piano. I've been playing piano for 30 years. So I feel oftentimes most at home in front of the piano. That was my first job.
Wow.
Was playing piano in restaurants and bars.
Do you do many gigs nowadays on piano?
No. I did that all from when I was 15 until about 21. I kind of earned a living playing piano. I would accompany choirs and instrumentalists, and I accompanied ballet classes. I play in restaurants in Melbourne.
Oh, that's way better than like I've had a part-time job at Subway through uni. Like that's far more interesting.
When I started, it was pretty wild because I was getting paid like, I can't remember if it was like $20 or $30 an hour when I was 15, and my friends were working at KFC earning like $7.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, this is sweet. But the pay never really changed.
No.
So by the time I finished my undergrad, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll do something else.
Yeah, time to earn a little bit more money somewhere.
Yeah. But I did lots of other jobs as well. I've always had to work a lot. But I somehow I feel most at home in front of the piano. That's kind of my happy place.
Oh, that's so special. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's nice.
Well, look, as a saxophonist, I think that sometimes I talk to students, or I've experienced myself, unlike other classical instruments where they might work towards, say, an orchestral position or something that they feel is sort of a path to follow. We don't really have that in saxophone or in the classical saxophone world. So how did you go about building a career as a saxophonist?
That's really the hardest part of being a saxophone player, I think, and that's kind of the talk that I have with my students when they arrive. I kind of sit them down and I'm like, look, this is
okay.
If you can imagine yourself doing anything else, go and do that.
Oh, really?
This is going to be, well, yeah, because if you can imagine yourself if you can imagine yourself being happy doing anything else, why struggle and fight because it's a hard, as you know, it's a hard road, because we don't have that really clear path. And and when I talk to my colleagues about this, and they'll say, oh, like a flautist or a clarinetist, they'll be like, yeah, but when you go for these auditions for an orchestra, there'll be like 50 people and only one place. And I'm like, yeah, but there's one place.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a real big difference from 0 places. And if every orchestra in the world has one place every, let's say, 20 years, big conservative, that's still a lot of orchestras with a lot of work. And I see it when in Geneva we have some really, really good classes, and I see often every week there'll be a student that gets a job with this orchestra or that orchestra, and it's really inspiring to see them achieve those dreams. But again, like some of my colleagues will be like, yeah, but not everyone wants to do that, or it's kind of there's no places, it's really competitive. And then you're sitting there like, yeah, sure, but you can either play with like the army band,
true,
or
yeah,
I don't know. That's about it, really. And I mean, and it's good that exists already. That's essentially why our pedagogy exists. The whole conservatory system was designed for these military academies. In Paris, at least, it began as a military academy for musicians that would sent off in military bands. So yeah, to get back to your question, I don't know. I never really felt like a saxophone player. I don't think. I was a student. I grew up in the countryside, and I was playing piano when I was in high school. I was like playing piano. That was already my job. I would be doing weddings, doing saxophone, doing piano, doing whatever it was. I just kind of doing everything.
Yeah.
And then I ended up kind of arriving at the VCA in Melbourne in the classical department, which was not at all what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be playing jazz.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't get in. But when you come from the countryside, no one told me really that you should audition to multiple places. And so I saw there was a poster in our music room at high school with the VCA. I can still remember it was this kind of, because the VCA is all different art schools. So there's like art, theater, and dance and music and whatever. And so there's this picture that tried to kind of incorporate all of them. So there was like the body of a dancer from behind with F holes drawn on her back. She was like holding a paintbrush or something. She had like a hat on. It was like this. And I remember it distinctly, this picture. And my music teacher said, oh, you should go there. I was like, all right, I'll go there. So
decision made.
Fast forward to the end of high school. And so I auditioned for jazz saxophone because that's what I wanted to do. Jazz piano because that was kind of my backup. And I was like, if I've been working as a jazz pianist for like the last 3 years, that should be okay. And my teacher at the time was like, yeah, you should audition for classical saxophone as well, because that'll give you some motivation for your AMEB exams.
Oh, wow.
Like, okay, whatever. Cool.
Third on the list.
Yeah, right. And no one really told me how to prepare an audition. I didn't know what it was. So instead of playing the pieces that I had nailed for my VCE exam, I chose new pieces and just practiced them by myself, and had never shown them to my teacher. I just showed up to this audition, and I didn't get in anywhere. Like it was a total fail. But I hadn't auditioned anywhere else, so I was like, "Oh shit, this is a bad idea.
Now?
What do I do now?" So I enrolled in like a TAFE course, and like Box Hill TAFE has a really good jazz program. It's kind of like a feeder program for the VCA, because little did I know, but the VCA only takes like one person a year per instrument.
And
so
you've gone in there with brand new repertoire that you haven't really practiced.
I've gone in there not knowing what I'm doing, and I'm like, geez, this is rough. So anyway, I head off to Box Hill, enroll in a jazz course, start there, and then in like February, I think, the beginning of the school year, I got a call, and they're like, oh, the person that was number 1 on the classical saxophone list didn't come. Do you want the spot? You're second on the list. And I was like, in my brain, I was like, yes, because I will transfer to the jazz department the second semester. Awesome. So I was like, yes, please. So I lived in Box Hill, which is not right next to the city, which is where the VCA is. I lived there for a year and kind of commuted in. I went to the VCA and loved it. It was an amazing, amazing department. It was a really special department because it was such a small department. Over the whole bachelor, there was not even 20 people, I think. So like over first, second, third years, there was maybe four or five flutes.
Oh, this is the whole wind department, just not just saxophone.
The whole woodwind department was, so I was, there was one other guy, John Crompton, that was a year above me. But in my year, I was the only saxophone player, and John was kind of the same. He was kind of like between jazz and classical. I just kind of spent all this time with this woodwind clique, and we had a lot of contact time for like orchestral techniques or woodwind techniques, so learning about breathing, learning about just general woodwind kind of things. And in performance classes, you would hear all the woodwind repertoire, and you would have lessons every week in woodwind workshop with Eve Newsom, who's amazing oboist, with Derek Jones, yes, amazing flautist, and then with Robert Schubert, who's amazing clarinetist, as well as my saxophone lessons. And so I just loved it. I was like, this is amazing. And it was just a cool vibe. And I didn't feel like a saxophone player. I just felt like a musician. Okay. Because you would get these comments from these musicians about, why does that sound weird? And you're like, I don't know, I'll change it. And so it wasn't like, oh, the saxophone is like that, so it sounds, when you're a saxophone player, it's like, oh, my middle D is high, or my, I don't know, the low notes are hard, or whatever it is. Like, you just make these excuses. But I didn't really have that to fall back on, because they're like, why can't you play soft in a low register? What's wrong with you? And I was like, oh, maybe I should practice that. And so I took the jazz class. I went and was pretty present in the jazz classes at the same time, but I never transferred. And I would be kind of doing gigs with my jazz quartet in the evening, playing jazz piano in a restaurant on Friday and Saturday nights, doing the classical things, doing gigs with the opera orchestra, just like kind of just doing everything. It's really schizophrenic kind of way of being. And I had a great time. Like, it was, for me, it was such a special time, because I was working a lot, but I had a lot of time to practice as well. So yeah, it was really special. And then one day, my teacher at the time, Barry Cockcroft, was like, this was my 4th year. He was like, yeah, you should go overseas. And I was like, yeah, I was thinking about it. Maybe like next year or something. He's like, no, go now. And so I remember we had that conversation maybe in like March, and in August I was in France.
Wow.
So it was
pushed you
pretty wild. He's just like, go. So I was like, where should I go? He's like, I went to Bordeaux. You should go there too. He's like, it was really good. And I was like, okay. So I sent Marie Bernadette Charrier, the teacher there, a CD in the post, because you couldn't do like a...
Of course.
You couldn't do like
no
a WeTransfer back then.
then.
No SoundCloud or anything. So I sent it in the post, like a disc. I recorded it at the studio at the VCA. I sent it in the post, and then she said, yeah, you may come and audition. And so I went and auditioned, and I got in, and yeah. And that's kind of how my European adventure started. And that's where I realized that in France, you can't do multiple things at once. You're not allowed.
A bit different.
Yeah, it's our Australian way of kind of being, where I just was like, I'm a musician, I play saxophone obviously, but if someone stole my saxophone tomorrow, I'd just be a pianist, or I'd find a clarinet. Like, I don't care what instrument I'm playing, I'm just playing music. It's not important. And I still feel that way. Although I have invested a lot of time blowing in the saxophone, so it would probably be a shame.
Yeah, I feel like you're very well established as a saxophonist by comparison.
But I mean, for me, it wouldn't be frustrating at all for me to just become a pianist tomorrow. I wouldn't mind. Like, sure. I don't mind. So anyway, I arrived in Bordeaux, and people were like, oh, what do you do, etc., etc. And you say, oh, I'm a saxophone player, but I also play piano, and I kind of play jazz. And you'd just see in their face, they'd be like, this person is not good at any of these things.
I feel like
there's no way.
Did it come across as maybe you weren't very serious then, or was there like some other implication that happened?
Yeah, I think that's like, if you dabble in a whole bunch of stuff, in their eyes, you're not good at any of those things.
Wow.
And so that was a real change, obviously, for me, who'd always, since forever done all these different things. And I think, I mean, I don't regret it, but I think for me, I wasn't conscious of what was happening. Because I kind of believed them, because, you arrive in Europe and you have these Europeans that make it very clear that, you can be good at one thing, but you can't be good at any of these other things. And I think for me, it really stunted for quite a while, my approach to improvisation, to jazz, to the piano, because I didn't do them. I just kind of cut those things out.
Okay.
And I was like, well, I'm here to study classical saxophone. That's what I'm doing. And so I did that from 2008 to like 2014. Just like straight ahead. I did 2 years with Marie Bernadette. I did 2 years with Vincent David. I won international competitions. I got into the Paris Conservatory. I did my master's with Claude Delong. And I was just like, classical saxophone is what we're doing now, because I can't do anything else. I'm not allowed. So all this energy somehow that I've been putting everywhere kind of just got put into one thing, which is good, I think. And that's why I don't regret that at all. But fast forward to like 2015 or whatever, and I was like, yeah, I really miss composing, and I really miss improvising, and I really miss playing jazz, and I really miss all these things.
Yeah.
And luckily, when I was at the Paris Conservatory, I had piano lessons every week. I had 2 years of piano lessons with Françoise Buffet, which was just amazing. So I really leveled up my
Is that
classical piano playing.
standard as part of being a saxophone student there, that you also take piano lessons?
You don't have to, but you can. In a lot of different European conservatories, you're able to do that. In Geneva, we have, it's a possibility, but if you do a pedagogy degree, a master's in pedagogy, you have to do piano and you have a piano exam.
Okay.
It's more integrated into the course. And so, yeah, after I kind of came out of that classical saxophone bubble, I really got back into being who I am. I guess I kind of found who I am again.
Yes.
And the thing is, in France, once you've got the stamp from the Paris Conservatory, then you can just do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's like, oh, I went to the CNSM in saxophone. You're like, oh, great. You must be a good musician. And you're like, I'm going to do a gig playing the ukulele in an underground bunker, and you should come. And you're like, great, I'm sure it'll be awesome. Whereas if I had done the same thing, 2 weeks before I got into the conservatory, they would have been like, that's going to be terrible.
No, you didn't have the stamp. And you touched on something there that I really wanted to talk to you about, which is your international competitions that you took on. Obviously, you won a very, very famous saxophone competition and did so quite early in your career and quite young. Would you like to talk a little bit about the Londex competition and what that was like, taking on something like that and then eventually winning?
I mean, it was I left Australia for the very first time to go to the Londex competition in 2008. I didn't win. I got into the semi-final, but that was the first time I'd ever really seen what the saxophone world was. So that was a real learning experience for me, because up until then, I'd been at the VCA and I kind of been around the con in Melbourne, but I wasn't the kind of person that was looking at saxophone videos on YouTube, or I didn't know like who Frederick Hemke was. I didn't know this kind of stuff. I was just like doing my thing. And I'd never played a lot of that repertoire. And I still haven't, to be honest, a lot of the kind of really typical repertoire, because I would just go and listen to all the stuff and then be like, well, this is rubbish, this is rubbish, this is kind of cool. And so my recitals in undergrad were just kind of weird. They were just the weirdest kind of music. I was doing like Heinrich Feld sonatas or like Jacqueline Fontaine pieces with harp, like just weird stuff, because I liked it.
Yeah, you weren't necessarily working through like a classical sax repertoire list, first years should learn this, second years, blah, blah, blah.
God, no. And so there's still a bunch of stuff like Dubois and all this kind of, I've never played it. I sometimes have to teach it, and I'm like, start off by saying, this is rubbish, but we'll work on it. But this what music is rubbish. And here's why. And so that was the first time, like I left Australia. First time, I think it was the second time I took a plane, because I'd been to Sydney once, but it was like a big adventure for me. I'd never been overseas before. Wow. Show up in this like crazy, like Bangkok is like this crazy place. And then there's like, I don't know, 150 saxophone players, all like at the top of their game from all over the world. And I was like, holy shit. And I heard someone play jungle for the first time. And I was like, what the fuck? Like,
oh, wow.
How did they do that? So I was just like, oh my God. And I got into the semi-final, and I hadn't prepared the semi-final because I never thought I would get into the semi-final. So I was just like, well, this is a thing. So that was good. So that was a real learning experience. So I came back to Australia. I remember just being like, I have to learn how to do slap tongue because I want to play that jungle piece, because that's wild. And so I couldn't do it. So I practiced for like 6 months to manage to be able to do it. And I think it's every like 3 or 4 years or something. So by the time the next one rolled around, I was in Vincent's class in Versailles, and that class, that's the perfect place to be to do a competition or an audition or something, because it's like just hot housed. Like at that time, it was probably one of the more difficult classes, even more difficult to get into somehow than Paris. It was like just hot housing, like.
It was,
everyone was preparing the same competitions. Everyone was preparing the same repertory, and you would like have like on Friday nights you would have just like a run through class where people would just be playing the same piece one after the other, and just like it was really intense. Like it was a really intense kind of vibe.
That seems so intimidating. Like, what is it like to be in a space like that? How does that affect your identity and how you see yourself as a muso?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think it's not a healthy place really at all, and I think I'm of the opinion that you need the right teacher, but you need the right teacher at the right time. because there's a lot of really
Okay.
good teachers, but you need to have them at the right time for you as the student. And so I guess the better the teacher, the better they can adapt themselves to be the teacher that you need at the time where you are in your. But some teachers just like, this is my way or the highway, and Vincent was like that at that time. And so it was kind of, for me, it was like a challenge. It was like, this kind of, it's sport. That whole side of the saxophone world is just sport. The competitions. And I have a real problem as the artist part of me, when I teach my students, has a real problem with these big competitions. Like nowadays, it's like Andorra or Dinan or whatever it is, imposing this repertoire that is kind of a very narrow scope and not great music. And everyone's just playing the same music, and everyone practices for a year this music that they probably would never play if given the choice. And obviously, when you've practiced all that music, your end of year recital is going to be predominantly that music, because that's what you've practiced. And so you don't have space anymore to like create, to find your own identity.
Yeah.
Because again, as I was saying earlier, like to be an artist as a classical musician, you have to find your identity by finding what music, what repertoire, works for you, what you want to put out into the world. And so it's kind of sport. I see that as kind of a sporting challenge. It's like the saxophone Olympics.
Yeah.
The repertoire for the Londex competition was a little bit more interesting than the Dinant ones. It was a little bit more varied, but it was kind of that. So I was like, I already know, I can visualize what this competition's like, and I've got Vincent to help me. And Vincent was really great with preparing like competition things. And so the two big things that I prepared with him were that competition and the entrance into the conservatory in Paris.
Wow.
And so that was like, for the entrance exam to Paris, I think I can't remember all the repertoire I played, but I remember playing the Berio Sequenza No. 7 by memory, and like just putting that together.
Great.
And just every week, just kind of having him drill you on it and just run through it in front of all these peers that are all auditioning for the same thing. Like everyone was doing the audition for the conservatory. Yeah. So you're preparing and presenting your program, which is pretty much the same program. It's a real mental kind of thing. It's pretty intimidating. Yeah. It's not healthy.
No, it doesn't sound healthy, but I think you've made a really key point about having the right teacher at the right time. And I think that, just to use, Vincent as an example, I first heard your name when I was at summer school at the GAP, the University European du Saxophone. And it was the year that you had won the Londex competition, and I was there. And in my lesson, he's like, I know I have an Australian student that just won this competition. And that was how my, my group lesson with him started. And I was like, oh, I'm not ready to be in front of you. Like, I am not competition standard. And and after watching him teach everyone else, I could see his style. I could see the way he communicated. And it was so unfortunate. I played terribly. It was the poor guy had to listen to me absolutely fumble my way through something through nerves. And then I went back the next year because I did 2 years in a row, and I was ready for his style, and I was ready to hear the way he taught and to understand what was happening, but also understand myself a little bit better as a player, and also practiced a lot more, I guess. I had a good kick up the butt. And it was a completely different experience with him and with many of the teachers there, because you do, as a student, it's hard because I guess you are in that formative age of your life where you're just establishing yourself as an adult. But you need to know a little bit about who you are as a musician and where you are in your learning journey, of what you have done well and what you need someone to be a little bit of tough love on, and what you need someone to maybe coach you through a little bit more gently. It can be really tricky.
I feel sometimes we're not conscious of all that kind of stuff when we're that age, though. I know that was definitely my case. I was, you can't understand what's going on. And so I did see some of the younger students that were going through that kind of hot housing. And it's a big kind of mental thing, because if you're not up to the challenge, or if you don't succeed or whatever it is, it's like, you've failed, and you kind of have this mental failure somehow if you don't. And I remember speaking with some of my colleagues at the time. Like, I came back, and from after winning this competition, I was still in the class with Vincent. And normally in France, like, only the students from the conservatory win competitions, because it's like you go through, and if you're good enough, you get into the conservatory, and then if you're in the conservatory, then you win these competitions, and that's kind of the mentality. And if you don't get into the conservatory, then obviously you're not good enough, so you can't do anything. And that, even though it's not true, a lot of people kind of believe it. They kind of buy into this thing. So there's a lot of, I think, wasted potential. And so I remember coming back after winning this competition, and like some of my colleagues were like, "Yeah, how did you win that? Like, you're not even at the conservatory. Like, nobody does that." And I was like, "I don't know, man. Just I don't know what." Like, it's super weird.
That's such a strange perspective.
Yeah, and I think it was good for me to have done that before, because when I went into the conservatory, then it's even, it's like a next level kind of intenseness of all this competitive. It's a super competitive class, and it's this kind of, and because I'd already won this competition, I was just like, hey dudes, I'm just going to do whatever I want, because I already got in here. I already have the stamp of this competition. I'm just going to go and play really weird music with some of the percussionists downstairs.
Was that well received?
I mean, I think they just think I'm like this weird kind of person, to be honest. And I don't really care. And I think I like the position that I have in kind of French saxophonist, because I'm kind of part of the team. I've done all the things, and I studied with 3 of the biggest teachers in France. But at the same time, I just don't care about that whole saxophone world. Like, it's not something that I invest in. Like, I do make the effort sometimes to go along and listen to some of the classical saxophone things. But I mean, there's so much stuff going on in Paris. There's such amazing art and music to go and see, that I don't really want to go and see people play the same pieces, because that's what we're trained to do. And we're not trained yet. Maybe it'll change one day, but we're not trained yet to really, and I keep banging on about this same thing, but for me, it's this real problem that we have in the saxophone world, is that because, just like you were saying, because we don't have this kind of path to follow, we need to create our own path. And if you're not actively learning how to do that during your studies, it doesn't just magically appear once you've graduated. You don't just magically find your own path and find your own musical kind of language and find great colleagues. It doesn't happen like that. You have to start, you have to practice it. It's a kind of a practiced artistic practice. And so I'm not really keen on going around listening to people do the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah. I think, We're riding this line in classical saxophone between, people that are building a canon and are, saying, of course we should replay works because these are our, this is our Mozart concerto or this is our whatever. But then, of course, a lot of us, if not the vast majority, are also innovating and commissioning and composing and working in new music or very modern music that maybe is only getting played once and then not getting a repeat, and are just focusing on innovating. And it feels like these kind of split loyalties, this kind of split of which, one is not better than the other. But I agree that, there's the Glazunov concerto is probably an example that I love it and I think it's beautiful, but if I never heard it again, I would be okay as a saxophone player.
Yeah, well, something I say to my students very often is, how much money do you think has been earned in the whole world by people getting gigs playing Glazunov, Ibert, Creston, whatever pieces you want to say? How many times has someone been called on the telephone and be like, hey, Jerry, I got a gig for you, playing the Creston Sonata. It's $1,000. You down? Like, that has never happened. No one has ever called anyone to play that music.
Look, I can say I did get $200 once to play the Glazunov. Once.
There you go. So we got $200 anyway. But you see what I mean? Like, a lot of the times that music is played because we push for it to be played, not because there's a necessity for it to be played. People aren't lining up to hear that music.
No, orchestras aren't programming a saxophone concerto in every program. They're not.
No, but people like Tim McAllister have done really great work of like finding and collaborating with composers and making it a thing, and people want to hear that. And so that creates a necessity, and that's cool. That's awesome.
Yes.
But it requires this kind of musical intelligence to collaborate with the right people and push towards the right kind of musical languages. And
do you think that's a creative decision, or maybe there's an element of understanding the business and marketing?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's of course. Understanding all that, how all that works. And I mean, I'm the last person to ask about all that. I don't I'm not very good at sending emails to people and harassing them. I just do my thing and then hope that someone calls me. And it's worked up until now.
Perfect. You are pretty active on
whole...
YouTube, though. I was doing a little bit of research on you before today's interview, and I was pretty impressed with the number of performances and recordings and things that you've got available for people.
Well, yeah, I just put everything on YouTube. I think YouTube's great. I mean, I always tell my students not to listen to anything on YouTube because it's all terrible. And then I put my performances on YouTube.
Maybe just don't listen to anyone in their bedrooms. Might be a good blanket rule for
but
YouTube.
That's the thing. It's kind of having them have kind of critical listening. But no, YouTube's great because you can... I mean, I love recording, and my favorite thing is recording because you can create something. I think it's because I always had such a special time listening. I'm someone that's always loved listening. I can remember the first time I got like a double cassette deck when I was like a kid for Christmas or something. And I was like, it was my favorite thing. It was like this, one of those buttons that's like bass boost or whatever it was.
That's
like
showing our age there,
like,
cassette tapes.
It was my favorite thing. And then when I got a Walkman, like a CD, I also had a cassette Walkman before that, but
you couldn't run though, because the CD would skip if you were running with a Walkman.
And my jacket pocket at high school would just fit perfectly the Discman in the pocket. So I always had such great, like I always was listening to music just constantly, and so like I would listen to a CD like 100 times. Just like whatever it was, I just listened to it over and over again. Or even one song, I would just put it on repeat and listen to like every detail in the music, because I just love that. I think because I have that real connection with listening to recorded media, and also growing up in a country where seeing live performances, where I grew up, not many people come past. So it was always through recorded media, and I had a huge collection of jazz records and whatever it was. For me, recording is a really special medium because it kind of you close your eyes and you transport someone to this place. And so I love recording. I love recording CDs, but also YouTube is like a way of kind of creating something and putting it there. And it's crazy. Like YouTube's a crazy place because there's people. I don't like post the things on Facebook or do any kind of extra work. I just put them on YouTube and see what happens. And sometimes you get messages from people from like crazy places that have found your videos. It's really nuts.
Special.
It's a really special place because there's everything on YouTube. So it's really cool.
Yeah. One thing I loved about your YouTube channel was your composer resources series. I was having a little. Can you tell me about like what inspired you to make that? What are you hoping comes out of that little series?
Well, that was a lockdown project.
Nice.
I did 2 big things during lockdown. I finished my doctorate and I did that. And I feel like that was good enough.
That's a lot more than I think. I learned to play the trumpet and I got to about ABB grade 1.
That'll come in handy.
So by comparison.
Well, because I work with composers all the time. So I'm always like arriving somewhere and doing new music. Yeah. And so you'll have a composer that has written for the saxophone and you arrive and you're like, oh, this is what I want to happen. And then you're like, well, if you want that to happen, then you need to write it like this, or that's not possible, or like, basically go back and rewrite your whole piece because you don't know how the saxophone works or whatever it was. Like there's always something, and it's always at exactly the wrong time. It's like the week before you need to perform it, or it's at the recording session. It's not cool. And so that had been happening for years. And so in the back of my mind, I was like, I really need to do something like that one day. Like one day when I have 3 months of free time, like
no gigs and nothing to do.
Exactly. And all of a sudden I had 3 months of free time. I was like, holy shit, now's the time. I just did it. And I went through really systematically and showed all the techniques, and I did like little visual. It took me ages. It took me so long to do it. But they've been really successful. Composers love them. I have composers come up to me all the time at concerts and be like, oh, thank you so much for your videos.
Yeah, I'm going to send them to composers now. Like that's going to,
great.
It's amazing. Yeah, so when getting like notated music written, composers' vision and what is actually possible or suits the saxophone, it might not match. And so there is kind of a learning process, I think, for composers to understand the saxophone or understand any instrument. So you've kind of cut that process down a little bit and kind of made this resource. Do you hope that it just spreads around kind of other composers and other saxophone players?
Yeah. I mean, that's what's great about YouTube. And again, that's what's great about recordings. It's like you do it once. It took me a few weeks. I did it. And and now it's online, and it just is there forever.
Yes.
And it just kind of, one day I'll die and it'll still be there, and hopefully it'll help someone.
Probably.
And it's like you don't have to do it over and over again. It's just like you put it there, it's online, and then it has its life.
Wow.
It's nice. And I have another YouTube channel as well that's a little bit funny for me because did you see my second YouTube channel?
No. I'm going to look for it now. What's your second YouTube channel?
I have a second one, which is just like nerdy saxophone music. Like etudes and furling things. And the reason why that started was I got a little bit known, I guess, when I won that competition. I was at the conservatory. So people knew who I was, and I wasn't really comfortable for some reason, like maximizing that kind of effect. I was like, I don't want people to judge me on the things I've done. I want them to judge me on the quality of my playing. So I made this anonymous YouTube account and would just record like furling etudes with no name or anything. And I really like, again, I really like recording. So I was practicing my recording technique and microphones and everything. Yes. And the thing like exploded. Like some of the videos I have like 50,000 views on like a furling etude. I was like, this is insane. So
there's
I just
a lot of people
a
learning this repertoire that they need to hear quality recording.
Yeah, and so I kept doing it, and then people were like, I was getting messages like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "This is okay. This has become too much." So a few years ago, I actually put my name on it, and I kind of record the stuff that my students are practicing. Particularly when I was teaching more younger students, I'd record like the Noda, the improvisations or stuff like that.
Did anyone ever guess? Like, did anyone guess that it was you?
No.
Did anyone have any wild guesses? Were they like wondering if it was someone, well known?
I can't remember. I know there was one person that was really trying to find out.
Really?
I can't remember who that was, but I think they had some guesses, but I can't remember. It was a long time ago, but there was one person who was really trying to find out who I was.
Oh, I can't wait to go through the comments on some videos.
But yeah, so I like that as well because it's stuff that I never play that kind of stuff in concert. I never would record that kind of music. But obviously, if you want to teach the saxophone and I want to keep my chops up, it's good to be able to play that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I like having kind of a second little...
an outlet. Oh, I can't wait to check it out. I'm so excited. And I mean, all of this is talking about composing and commissioning and saxophone repertoire, but you're an improviser as well and a composer yourself. So how does improvising fit into the work that you do, into the recordings that you make? Are you someone that likes to put up recordings of improvisations and live performances?
So improvising for me, I guess, is just a part of my practice since I was a kid. When I started saxophone, I guess, in high school. So when I was like 12 or 13, and I was already playing piano, and I had my saxophone teacher was more or less a jazz musician, and he got me after about a year of lessons playing with the city jazz band. So it was, it's the kind of thing where you're like, stand up and take a solo, and you're like, what's a solo? And you're like, stand up and you'll find out. And you just kind of get used to doing it. And so improvising was kind of a thing that I would just do. And there was a class in Paris at the conservatory that I ended up doing a diploma in for 3 years after I finished my studies. It was called generative improvisation. It's just like the weirdest kind of improvising, just kind of like sound. So it's based off of the kind of Pierre Schaeffer electronic music school of just like pure sound, working with just kind of starting from a sound and just evolving a sound and kind of improvising with different people with no stylistic kind of influence. And so I really enjoyed that. And I guess after I finished my studies, I kind of came back around to improvising, and I've released a few kind of albums of improvised stuff. One where I play a bunch of different instruments like piano, flute, saxophone, and I forget what else, accordion even, I kind of created. Again, I love recording, so like the idea of like improvising and then improvising again on top of that and then kind of creating a product out of it. I really like that.
Yeah.
And so I have a couple of things like that. And I currently have two groups that I just improvise with. So it's a group called Vitrio. I don't know how you say it. Vitrio. Vitrio. In Geneva with a double bassist and a drummer. And we just get together and improvise. And it's kind of like almost jazz. I wouldn't call it jazz. It's almost jazz.
Almost jazz.
It's a bit weird too weird to be jazz. And then another trio with an electric guitarist and a guy who does like beats and samples and stuff. And that's more like electro weirdness. And that's mostly improvised, but kind of some of it's composed. But yeah, for me, improvising is really a fundamental part of being a musician.
Yeah.
I really force my students to do it. And the less they like it, the more it makes me smile when you're like, okay, let's improvise. And they're just like, what? You're like, let's go. And I just sit down at the piano and I'll be like, let's go, let's play. And after a couple of times they get into it and they're just so happy because they're just playing.
It's
nice.
It's fun and it's creative and special. And I'm going to ask you a question so I have a very, very keen high school student who loves to ask fabulous questions, who's actually been great for the podcast because she's, I think, in her mindset. And I just know if she was here right now, she would ask you, how on earth do you rehearse for an improvised gig? And do you have to rehearse or practice?
That's an excellent question. I mean, what is improvisation? That's the thing. Like, is anything improvised? Because if you've practiced... And that's the big question about jazz, isn't it? You see all there's so many nowadays, these videos on YouTube about like how to do, you've got like an E flat minor, flat 9, and then you're just going to like an A, whatever. And like over this, you have to play this and this and this. And by the time you follow all the instructions, you have maybe one note per bar that you can choose on your own because everything else is decided.
Yeah.
So is that improvising? Some would say no. I wouldn't go so far as to say that because I don't want to get cancelled.
It's a safe route to take.
Yeah. But you definitely can practice improvising 100%. The more you improvise, the better you get at improvising. And in improvisation, you say the best improviser is the person that knows the most melodies. You kind of, the more you listen, the more you play, the more you kind of just know, the more sounds you have in your brain, the more you know when to kind of use them. And so when you're improvising, the fellow that founded the improvisation class in Paris, a man called Alain Savouret, and his kind of one of his phrases was, improvisation is, as an improviser, you are first an ear. You're first a listener before anything else. You don't just show up and start playing as an improviser. It's like when you're talking, it's like a conversation. You don't just show up and start talking about some random bullshit.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, there are people that do, but but you come in, you listen, you see what's up, and then if this conversation requires something, or if this space requires a particular sound, or you think you can make it better by doing a particular thing, then you add that. But the more things you know, the more, same as in a conversation, the more things you know about, the more sounds that you know, the more melodies that you know, the more you can add something to a conversation. So I see it really like that. So you can definitely practice, but practicing it means, listening as well.
Yeah, wow. And some of your improvisations, I know, include some amazing electronics. I've seen some very cool things on social media and through one of your collaborators, Ben Carey, some of the work that you guys have done together. Can you talk a little bit about, your work with electronics and some of the cool things that you've done there?
Well, I love working with computers. And so I have a series called Vertical Horizons, which is, I call them improvisational contexts. So they have like a video aspect that I do myself. And then live processing through Ableton Live, so with different effects. And I like them because it gives you freedom as an improviser. You can just improvise whatever you want, but after I do them a few times, they tend to have a particular sound world, each one. But because the effects are linked to the visual, whatever you play is going to be adjusted in sound, but synchronized with the visual. So there's always going to be a kind of synchronization that you feel as a listener. So I really like, I'm currently writing one. I actually have a bunch of lights. I'm figuring out how to connect lights to my computer at the moment and control them with Ableton Live. That's my
exciting.
Next project, which will be premiered in September. And the thing with Ben, Ben's great. Ben Carey is like, if you don't know Ben Carey, go out and listen. He has actually a record that dropped last week.
Okay. I have to check that out too. I haven't seen it yet.
On the Surge modular synthesizer. And he's just a fantastic musician. We actually met in Bordeaux. I met Ben when I arrived in Bordeaux. He was studying the saxophone there.
Wow. 2 Australians that meet overseas?
Yeah. And I'd never met him because he was from Sydney, and people from Sydney and Melbourne do not talk to each other.
Of course not.
Unless they're in a neutral zone, unless they're in France. We became really good friends, and we've done lots of different projects together. We got an Australia Council grant to go to Chile a few years ago, and we premiered some of our own pieces down there. We did some projects with some schools and things. We'd done projects here in Paris. We played at the Earcamp Forum. I performed his piece, which is like an AI improvisation software, which is really amazing. So we've done lots of different projects, but kind of working on either his music or my music. And we'd never just kind of really sat down and improvised. And I think, was it when I was in Sydney last in like April, I was like, hey man, I'll come to Sydney just to hang out. And he's like, let's record a thing, like let's do something.
Wow.
And so we just got into a studio for like 2 or 3 days. And he has all these modular synthesizers and huge, I don't understand it all, how it works. It's like a bunch of things plugged into the front. It looks like a 1970 kind of like sci-fi movie. And we just played for like 2 days, I think. And it was just really good. It was really nice. We just improvised him on like these massive synthesizers, like, and I was just playing saxophone. And so that was really fun. So that's gonna be released on the 15th of December, I think.
Oh, that's a fast turnaround.
Yeah, on a label whose name I can't remember. I told you I'm not very good at all the business side of things, but you'll see it on the internet.
I'll look it up before the episode's released and make sure it's tagged somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
but that was really
amazing.
fun. But it was a really weird process for me because, to get back to the question for your student, I guess I'd been practicing improvisation this whole time, but we'd never practiced with Ben. So we kind of arrive, and in 2 days we had an album. We never like practiced together or prepared anything. We didn't have a score. And like normally for a project where you make an album, like, you know, there's like 6 months of work, you're practicing the score, you're collaborating with the composer, or like you're rehearsing or whatever it is. You know, there's a real arc to that feels to me normal. Like you can't just show up and do a thing the first time and then have that be the album. That's not possible. That's not how it works. You have to practice, you have to rehearse, you have to,
right.
I don't know, where's the conductor? And so we kind of did the thing and we're like listening to it. I'm like, this is really good. And it was like, okay, that's it. That's done. Great.
Amazing.
So yeah, and so he's actually arriving today. He's arriving this afternoon and we're going to do a second one here in Paris.
Oh, that's so exciting. I hope you've got something in the titles of, you know, like the Sydney sessions, the Paris sessions.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we call it something like that. Yeah. Une soirée à Paris.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah. So I keep busy. I do lots of kinds of different things, I guess. There's a lot to talk about.
There is. And I will flag that, you know, we're maybe not even halfway down the page of my notes of things to talk about, but we've already been talking for a really long time.
That's good. That's good. It's nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think it's a real testament to everything that you do and how fascinating all the different little components of your career are, which is amazing. I have been ending every interview with the same 3 questions, but before we go to those, I do want to ask you, just circle back to that amazing instrument wall.
Oh, yeah.
What have you got on there?
Well, this is just stuff that I, you know, before in the old times when we could travel and do projects, I would kind of collect instruments from where I was. So up there, this is a Ken from Thailand. Just like a mouth organ over here. Can you see that? The big long one. It's a Fujara from Slovakia that I had made by an amazing. I don't know if you can hear me still.
Oh yes.
I had made by I actually found him in a documentary. I was like I discovered the existence of this instrument. I was like, this is beautiful. And if you look up Fujara, Fujara online, there's some amazing players. I was like, I need one of these instruments. And again, like I was saying earlier, like. I'm a saxophone player, but like I could not be a saxophone player. And there was a time in my career after I'd done all that saxophone stuff, I was just like, saxophone, schmaxophone. Like I practiced. I was lucky I was doing a lot of gigs because I had to practice for the gigs, but otherwise I would never have practiced. I was just like preparing for stuff, and then I was buying flutes and practicing random flutes.
Wow.
And so I found out about this instrument. I was like, I need one of those. So I was like Googling and like I found this documentary about them, and there was a maker, like a very famous maker in this documentary. So I like found him and contacted him, and then I ordered these flutes and I went there. I drove to Slovakia.
Oh, wait, I was going to ask, how did you get that on a plane? But you did it. You drove.
I drove there, and there's this one, and he made also this is an overtone flute and a double. This one here is a double overtone flute. So you've got one that's kind of keyed on one side. and then just an overtone flute on the other side. And you can play them together.
Wow.
So
Sounds
they're all
stunning.
like amazing. They're all really amazing kind of, and at the time when I was getting them, I was kind of improvising with them, and I liked the fact that it was putting like a filter on my voice somehow. Like you improvise, you play with them, but somehow you're filtered, and you kind of, it's like, if you put everything through a blue lens, or everything's through the lens of whatever the instrument is. This one's from, I got this in Shanghai, I think. It's a double bawu. So there's a lot of stuff here. This one, I won't play it for you because it's the loudest instrument I've ever heard in my entire life. It's called a pinai. I'm pronouncing it probably totally wrong. It's a Thai instrument that has 4 reeds. It's a double reed that goes on the end here, and you just kind of put it in your mouth and just blow as hard as you can. It's like a ceremonial instrument in Thailand. And I was teaching in this academy in Bangkok where I teach every summer. And the lift, there was always too many people in the lifts because all the students would go up and down. And so I was like, I'll take the stairs. So I went up, and we were like, I think we're on the 13th or 14th floor. And so I walk up, I get about halfway, and I had just the worst saxophone student of my life. I'm like, how? Oh my God, I'm going to have to teach this student. This sounds horrible.
Oh no.
And it got closer and closer, and I was like, wait a second, that's no saxophone. That's something else. And I get closer and closer, and I got to the traditional Thai floor, because they did have different floors in the university where they taught. And on this floor, they were teaching traditional instruments. And there was this guy playing this instrument. I was like, what is that? Like, because it's just, Google it, it's like P-I. I think if you just Google P-I Thai instrument, it should come up.
Okay.
And I was like, what? And this guy didn't speak English. So we're like, with Google Translate, like, what are you doing? And it's like, this is a P9. And I was like, how can I get one?
Can I please buy it?
Yeah. And he was like, oh, I can probably get one made. I was like, okay, how much, when, now? I'm here for another week.
I'm ready to go.
And so we just like get in it. He calls the guy, organizes it. We get in this taxi and arrive in like this suburb of Bangkok in this like little wooden shed out in the back of some alleyway. And the guy had made me this beautiful instrument, but he'd also made some other instruments. And he was the instrument maker for the Thai royal family. Like, he would make their instruments. And so he made me this. This is called a klui. So you can hear it. He's got his signature on the side there.
Oh, beautiful.
And so this is a klui, which is like works in the same way as a recorder, I guess. And I'm not very good at these instruments, but.
Stunning.
So that's a clue. And so yeah, there's a whole array. These are 3. This is in the same family as that other P. This is called a P Joe or something else. It's got the same name as a P, but it's different.
That's so much lower than I thought it would be from looking at it.
Yeah, and they have all 3 different kinds. So yeah, so I have a little collection of this kind of a mix of memories and personal development and.
Yeah, I can see. And then the saxophones down the bottom. The saxophones are still there.
Yeah, but you know how they sound. They're all the same. I'm very lucky to have very nice saxophones. My beautiful Selma saxophones.
Yes, stunning. Oh, look, well, let's tackle the final 3. So,
tell me,
what advice do you have for young people looking to get into the classical music industry?
Classical music industry. Oof. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm even in the classical music industry myself.
That could be broadened a little bit more for your background.
I mean, you got to practice. You got to find the right teacher. You have to like what you're doing. I think that's the most important thing, is you have to like the music you're playing.
Okay.
I think you should never be playing music that you don't resonate with, because it's never 100%. It never really works. So if you're listening and loving the music that you're doing, you're practicing it, and you have a good teacher, then it's hard to go wrong. But it's also necessary, I think, to understand that the classical music industry, like all industries, but particularly all artistic industries, is based on networks and knowing people and being in the right place at the right time. But, going to concerts, talking to people after concerts, getting opportunities, knowing what's going on by your network, I think is really important. But if you haven't done all the work of listening and practicing, there's no point having good context, because once they dig down into your recordings online or whatever it is, they'll just be like, oh, forget about it. But if you've got really great stuff going on, and then you show up after a concert and you're like, oh, whoever it is, Richard Tognetti, great concert, loved this, here's my card, and then they check out your stuff and it's great, then
then you can go somewhere.
Then you can go somewhere with that. But I think my advice would be, you got to like the music you're playing. You got to love it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. What don't you think people know about a life in the music world?
I think people don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people don't know, I'm sure. It depends which people. But I think people don't know about the middle. So you kind of see like the poor, we have this image of like the poor muso, like in their mum's basement or whatever, like playing guitar and sending cassette tapes out to like record labels and just failing. Like we have that image in our brains. That's what all our parents have, that image in their brains.
Definitely.
And then you see like, you're like A-listers, like your Sabina Meyer and your whoever they are nowadays, like your Lang Langs, and you see that. But what people don't see is like the rest of people making a decent living, people having a good time, people having a perfectly good life, not being famous, not being poor, just kind of existing as artists, existing as musicians. And I think there's more people like that than you would think. And I think people don't know about those people, because it's like, oh, you're a musician, you're not famous, oh, you must be a failure. So it's either one or the other. But there's a whole bunch of people who aren't famous, who are doing good work, and could be famous or not, depends. But are just having a perfectly good life, being a musician or an artist or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because everyone finds their own way, everyone finds their own balance. It's like there's no one way to be a musician. It's my way of kind of doing it was supporting myself, doing whatever work I found, whether it was musical work or non-musical work. When I arrived in Paris, I was cleaning corridors and doing all kinds of horrible jobs. But I was kind of subsidizing my living by doing that. And that's for some people. A lot of people do that. Or some people have rich parents, or some people have a spouse who's happy to support them, or whatever it is. There's a different situation for every different musician, I think. So I think people don't know that it's possible. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And finally, if you had your time all over, would you do it all again?
Oh, yeah, sure. But I guess I would do different stuff, because I already did all this stuff. I love new stuff.
Would you switch to the jazz course 6 months in?
I don't know. You can never. I don't have any regrets. If I knew everything I knew now, I don't know, I'd go and be an investment banker, I guess. I'd know exactly what to invest in. No, I mean, I'm very happy. I would do it all again, of course.
Amazing.
No regrets.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm very excited for everyone. I know podcasting is an audio medium, but I'm glad we videoed this Zoom call so people can see all the amazing instruments as well.
Yeah, great.
So thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for having me. Great to chat with you.